The snowmobile roared to life in my garage on a crisp January morning in Eagle River, Wisconsin, and I had no idea that sound would trigger a war with my homeowners association that would end with me holding all the cards. My name is Ryan Atkins, and I had just purchased what I considered to be a reasonable winter toy for living in one of the snowiest regions in America. The 2024 Ski-Doo sat gleaming in my detached garage, a beautiful machine that I had saved 2 years to afford. I was admiring it when my phone buzzed with an email that made my blood pressure spike. The email was from Deborah Patterson, the president of the Pineview Estates HOA, informing me that snowmobiles were prohibited within the community, and that I had 72 hours to remove it from the premises, or face daily fines of $200. I read the email 3 times, feeling my jaw clench tighter with each pass. I had reviewed the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions before purchasing my home 8 months ago. There was no mention of snowmobiles anywhere in those documents. I immediately called the HOA office and got Deborah's assistant, a timid woman named Sandra who clearly did not want to be in the middle of whatever was about to happen. She stammered that Deborah was unavailable but would be at the community center the next morning for the monthly board meeting. I told Sandra I would be there too. That night, I pulled out every document related to my property purchase. My house sat on 3 acres at the edge of Pineview Estates, a community of about 40 homes built around a man-made lake. I had specifically chosen this property because it backed up to state forest land, giving me direct access to hundreds of miles of snowmobile trails. It was literally the perfect location for my new hobby. As I sorted through the papers, something caught my eye. The original survey of my property, conducted when the land was subdivided in 1987, showed my 3 acres as part of a larger parcel. More interesting was the access road that led into Pineview Estates. The main entrance came off County Road J, but there was a secondary access road that the residents used to reach the boat launch on the lake. According to my survey, that access road cut directly across the northeastern corner of my property. I pulled up the county GIS mapping system on my computer and traced the property lines. Sure enough, approximately 200 feet of that access road crossed my land. The previous owner, an elderly man named Theodore Morrison, who had moved to Arizona for health reasons, had apparently allowed the HOA to use it without any formal easement. I checked the title insurance documents and the deed. There was no recorded easement giving the HOA or anyone else the right to use that portion of the road. A smile crept across my face. I was not typically a vindictive person, but I also was not someone who rolled over when pushed around. If Deborah wanted to play hardball over a snowmobile that was not even mentioned in the governing documents, I was prepared to show her what hardball actually looked like. The next morning, I walked into the community center conference room at exactly 9 o'clock. About 15 residents were scattered around the room, most of them retirees who apparently had nothing better to do than attend HOA meetings. Deborah sat at the head of the table, a woman in her early 50s with short blonde hair styled in what I called the "I want to speak to the manager" cut. She wore a burgundy blazer and had reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed some papers. She looked up when I entered and her expression soured. "Mr. Atkins, I am glad you could join us, though this is a closed board meeting. Residents can attend the quarterly general meetings." "I am here about your email regarding my snowmobile," I said, remaining standing near the door. "I would like to understand the basis for your claim that they are prohibited." Deborah exchanged glances with the other board members, 2 men in their 60s named Gerald and Patrick. "The HOA board has the authority to enforce community standards, Snowmobiles are loud, disruptive, and not in keeping with the peaceful nature of our community. Show me where in the CCRs it says snowmobiles are banned, I replied calmly. The board has the authority to make reasonable rules, Deborah said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. We voted on this last month. Without notifying the homeowners, I never received notice of any vote or proposed rule change. In fact, the CCRs require 30 days written notice for any amendments, and amendments must be approved by a 2/3 vote of all homeowners, not just the board. Patrick leaned forward. Young man, we have been running this community for over 15 years. We know what we are doing. Then you should know that you cannot simply invent rules that contradict your own governing documents, I said. I reviewed the CCRs thoroughly before purchasing. There is no prohibition on snowmobiles, motorcycles, boats, or any other recreational vehicles. The only requirement is that they be stored in garages or behind privacy fences when not in use. My snowmobile is garaged. Deborah's face flushed red. Mr. Atkins, you are a new resident here. Perhaps you do not understand how things work in Pineview Estates. We maintain certain standards, and if you cannot abide by them, perhaps this is not the right community for you. Are you suggesting I sell my home because I own a snowmobile that is not prohibited by any written rule? I am suggesting that you need to be a team player, Deborah said. Several residents have complained about the noise. I have started it exactly once, yesterday morning at 10 a.m., and it ran for less than 5 minutes while I checked the engine. That is hardly a pattern of disruption. Gerald, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Look, Ryan, can I call you Ryan? We are trying to maintain property values here. Snowmobiles, dirt bikes, all that stuff, it brings down the neighborhood. We live in Eagle River, Wisconsin, I said, letting my frustration show. We are literally known as the snowmobile capital of the world. Half the homes in this county have snowmobiles. It is part of the culture here. Not in Pineview Estates, Deborah said firmly. The 72-hour notice stands. If that snowmobile is not removed from your property by Friday at 5 p.m., you will be fined $200 per day until it is gone. I stood there for a moment, considering my options. I could hire a lawyer and fight this, which would be expensive and time-consuming. Or I could use the leverage I had discovered the night before. I decided to give them one more chance to be reasonable. Deborah, I strongly suggest you reconsider this. I am happy to be a good neighbor, but I am not going to be bullied into giving up property rights that I legally possess. If you push this, you are going to regret it, her eyes narrowed. Is that a threat, Mr. Atkins? It is a friendly warning from one homeowner to another. Back off the snowmobile issue and we will all get along fine. The 72-hour notice stands, she repeated. This meeting is over. I walked out of the community center and sat in my truck for a few minutes, letting my anger cool. I was not bluffing. If they wanted to play this game, I would play to win. I drove directly to the county clerk's office in downtown Eagle River. The clerk, a friendly woman in her 30s named Mary, helped me pull up all the property records for Pineview Estates. I explained what I was looking for, and she showed me how to trace the history of the development. The land had originally been owned by a logging company, then sold to a developer in 1985. The developer had carved out the residential lots and built the infrastructure, including the roads and the boat launch. The access road to the boat launch, I asked, pointing to the map on her computer screen. Who owns it? Mary clicked through several screens. Well, it looks like most of it is owned by the HOA as common area, but there is a section here that is on private property. Let me see. She pulled up the property identification numbers. That section crosses Lot 17, which is owned by, she looked at another screen, Ryan Atkins. Is that you? That is me. Is there any recorded easement giving the HOA the right to use that section? Mary searched for several minutes. I do not see any recorded easement. There is a note in the file from 1987 indicating that the original owner of Lot 17, that would be Theodore Morrison, gave verbal permission for the road use, but nothing was ever formalized. So legally, I own that section of road and no one has the legal right to use it without my permission. That would be correct, Mary said carefully, though you would want to talk to a lawyer to be absolutely sure. But based on what I am seeing here, yes, you could theoretically restrict access. I thanked Mary and walked out of the clerk's office with a spring in my step. My next stop was the law office of James Hendricks, a real estate attorney whose billboard I had seen on the drive into town. His secretary got me in for an emergency consultation that afternoon. James was a man in his late 40s with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. I laid out the situation for him, starting with the snowmobile dispute and ending with my discovery about the access road. He listened carefully, taking notes on a legal pad. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," James said when I finished. "The HOA is trying to enforce a rule that does not exist in the governing documents, and they are threatening you with fines. Meanwhile, their only access to the boat launch crosses your property, and there is no recorded easement." "That is correct." "And you have confirmed with the county that there is no easement." "I have. I also checked my title insurance policy. It does not mention any easement." James leaned back in his chair, a slight smile on his face. "Mr. Atkins, you have what we in the legal profession call leverage, substantial leverage. Here is what I recommend. First, I will draft a letter to the HOA formally disputing their authority to ban your snowmobile and demanding they withdraw the threat of fines. Second, I will send a separate letter informing them that you are aware their access road crosses your property without legal authority, and that you expect them to negotiate an easement agreement in good faith. What if they refuse? Then we file for a declaratory judgment on the snowmobile issue, which you will almost certainly win. And if they really want to play hardball, you can revoke permission for them to use the road. But I would not recommend that as a first step. It is the nuclear option. You live in this community, and burning bridges is not usually in your best interest. What if I do not care about burning bridges with these people? James studied me for a moment. Then you have the legal right to gate off your property and prevent access. But understand, that would make you extremely unpopular. The residents use that road daily to access the boat launch. "Let me think about it," I said. "For now, send the letters. Let us see how they respond." James drafted both letters that afternoon. I reviewed them, approved the language, and he sent them via certified mail the next day. The letter regarding the snowmobile was firm but professional, citing the relevant sections of the CCRs and Wisconsin state law regarding HOA authority. The letter about the access road was more exploratory, essentially asking the HOA to explain their legal basis for using my property. The response came faster than I expected. On Thursday morning, I received a phone call from Deborah. Her tone was icy. "Mr. Atkins, I received a letter from your attorney yesterday. I find your threats regarding the access road to be petty and vindictive." "I am not making threats," I said calmly. "I am simply asking for an explanation of the legal arrangement that allows the HOA to use my property. Surely you can understand why I would want to understand the full extent of the easements and encumbrances on my land. That road has been in use for nearly 40 years. Theodore Morrison never had a problem with it. Theodore Morrison does not own the property anymore. I do. And I checked with the county. There is no recorded easement, so from my perspective, the HOA is trespassing on my land multiple times per day. There was a long pause. What do you want? I want you to withdraw the snowmobile ban and acknowledge that it was improperly imposed. In exchange, I will work with you to formalize an easement for the access road. You are blackmailing us. I am negotiating, I corrected. You created this situation by trying to enforce a rule that does not exist. I am simply pointing out that you need something from me, and I need something from you. That is called compromise. The board will never agree to this. Then I will see you in court, and in the meantime, I will be putting up a gate across the section of the access road that crosses my property. I checked with my attorney. I have every legal right to control access to my land. You would not dare. Try me, Deborah. I have the survey stakes being placed tomorrow. The fence company is coming Monday morning. I hung up before she could respond. I was bluffing about the fence company, but I wanted to put pressure on her. James had advised me to give them time to consider the situation, but I was done being patient with these people. That evening, I received an email from Gerald, one of the other board members. His tone was more conciliatory than Deborah's. Ryan, I think we got off on the wrong foot here. Can we meet in person to discuss this? I am sure we can find a solution that works for everyone. How about coffee tomorrow morning at the diner on Main Street? I agreed and met Gerald at 9 a.m. the next day. He was already seated in a booth when I arrived, 2 cups of coffee waiting. He stood and shook my hand, his grip firm. "Thank you for coming," he said as we sat down. "I wanted to talk to you away from Deborah. She can be a bit intense." "That is one word for it," Gerald chuckled. "Look, I am going to be straight with you. The snowmobile thing was not a board decision. It was Deborah's decision. She has a problem with you specifically." "Why, I have never even spoken to the woman before this week." "You bought the Morrison property." Theodore Morrison was a good friend of hers, and when his health declined and he had to sell, she was upset. She had wanted the board to purchase the property and turn it into additional common area, but the homeowners voted against it because of the cost. "Then you came in and bought it privately." "That is not my problem." I know. I am just giving you context. Deborah has been looking for a reason to make your life difficult since you moved in. When she heard the snowmobile start up, she saw her opportunity. So what are you proposing?" Gerald took a sip of his coffee. "I spoke with Patrick last night. We both think Deborah has overstepped her authority. The snowmobile ban is not legally enforceable and we know it. We are prepared to override her and withdraw the notice. And the access road, we need to formalize an easement. Theodore always let us use it, but we should have recorded something official years ago. That was sloppy on our part. We are willing to pay for the legal costs to draw up a proper easement agreement." "What are you offering in exchange?" Gerald looked uncomfortable. "What do you mean?" "An easement has value. You are asking me to give up a portion of my property rights in perpetuity. In commercial real estate, the party granting the easement is typically compensated. What is the HOA willing to pay?" I had not thought about it that way. "We do not really have a budget for something like this." "Then I suggest you find one. My attorney is researching comparable easement values in the area. I will have a number for you by next week." Gerald looked like he wanted to argue but held back. "Okay, get us the number." "But Ryan, please do not put up a gate. That would cause real problems for a lot of innocent people who just want to use the boat launch. Then tell Deborah to withdraw the snowmobile ban in writing by Monday morning. If I have that in hand, I will hold off on the gate. But if she continues to push this, I will make life very difficult for everyone in Pineview Estates." We parted on relatively good terms, and I drove home feeling like I had the upper hand. James called me that afternoon to tell me he had researched easement values. Based on comparable sales and easement agreements in Vilas County, he estimated that a permanent access easement across my property should be worth between $15,000 and $20,000. That seems high, I said. It is actually on the conservative end, James replied. You are giving up permanent use of approximately 200 linear feet of road frontage. That has significant value, especially since the HOA has no alternative access to the boat launch. If you wanted to push for more, you probably could. Let us start at 20,000 and see what they say. That weekend, I took my snowmobile out for the first time. The weather was perfect, with fresh powder from an overnight snowfall. I loaded the machine onto my trailer, drove to a public access point about 5 miles away, and spent 4 glorious hours riding through the state forest. It was everything I had hoped for when I bought the property. The trails were well maintained, the scenery was spectacular, and the snowmobile performed beautifully. When I got home, exhausted and happy, there was an envelope stuck in my front door. It was a formal letter from the HOA board, signed by all 3 members, withdrawing the snowmobile ban and acknowledging that it had been imposed in error. The letter apologized for any inconvenience and stated that the board looked forward to working with me on formalizing the access easement. I felt a surge of satisfaction. They had blinked first. I texted Gerald to thank him for his reasonableness and said I would have my attorney send over the easement proposal early in the week. James sent the proposal on Monday morning. It outlined a permanent easement for the access road, with the HOA paying $20,000 plus all legal costs for recording the easement. The proposal also included language protecting my property from any liability related to the use of the road and requiring the HOA to maintain that section of road at their expense. Deborah called me within an hour of receiving the proposal. She was furious. $20,000. Are you insane? We are not paying that. Then you are not getting an easement, I said simply. And I will be putting up a gate by the end of the week. This is extortion. This is fair market value for a permanent property easement. My attorney researched comparable transactions. If anything, I am giving you a deal because I have to live in this community. The homeowners will never approve this expense. That sounds like your problem, not mine. You have until Friday to accept the offer. After that, I am revoking permission for anyone to use that section of road. You are making a lot of enemies, Mr. Atkins. I did not start this fight, Deborah. You did. I gave you multiple opportunities to back down and you refused. Now you are going to pay the price, literally. She hung up on me. I was not surprised. Deborah struck me as someone who was used to getting her way through bullying and intimidation. She had met her match in me. On Wednesday, I received a call from an unknown number. It was a woman named Helen, one of the residents who lived on the lake. Her voice was kind but concerned. Mr. Atkins, I hope you do not mind me calling. Gerald gave me your number. I am on the board of the Lake Association, which is separate from the HOA. I wanted to talk to you about the access road situation. Okay. I understand there is a dispute between you and the HOA. I do not want to get in the middle of that, but I wanted you to know that the boat launch is used by a lot of families, including some who are not part of Pineview Estates. If you block the road, it will affect a lot of innocent people. I understand that, Helen. But the HOA is trying to impose illegal restrictions on my property. I am defending my rights. I completely understand, and I think you are in the right here. Deborah has been out of control for years. But is there any way to resolve this without hurting the people who have nothing to do with the dispute? I thought about it. The HOA has until Friday to accept my easement proposal. If they do, the road stays open. If they do not, I am putting up a gate. I am not trying to punish random people, Helen, but I am also not going to let the HOA walk all over me. What if the Lake Association paid for the easement instead of the HOA? We have a separate budget and we could probably raise the money. Why would you do that? Because we want to keep the peace. And frankly, because Deborah does not speak for all of us. A lot of people think she is wrong about the snowmobile thing. I appreciate the offer, Helen, but this is between me and the HOA. They created this problem. They need to solve it. Helen sighed. I understand. I just hope this does not escalate further. Thursday morning, I got a call from James. Ryan, I just received a call from the HOA's attorney. They want to negotiate. What are they offering? $10,000 plus legal costs. They are also willing to formalize in writing that snowmobiles and other recreational vehicles are permitted as long as they are stored in compliance with the existing CCRs. Counter at $18,000. I will drop to $15,000 if they throw in a formal apology to be read at the next general homeowners meeting. James laughed. You drive a hard bargain. Let me see what I can do. By Friday afternoon, we had a deal. $15,000, legal costs paid by the HOA, a formal written apology, and an ironclad easement agreement that protected my property from any liability. James drew up the paperwork, and we scheduled a closing for the following Wednesday. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The following Monday, I woke up to find my mailbox had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted profanities on it and knocked it over. I took photos and filed a police report, though I doubted anything would come of it. The sheriff's deputy who took the report was sympathetic, but said mailbox vandalism was difficult to prosecute without witnesses. That night, someone slashed 2 of the tires on my truck. Again, I filed a police report and had the tires replaced. I also installed security cameras around my property, including a high-definition camera pointed at the driveway. On Tuesday, the day before the easement closing was scheduled, I received an anonymous letter in the mail. It was typed and unsigned, but the message was clear. Leave Pineview Estates or things will get worse. You are not welcome here. I showed the letter to the sheriff's deputy who had taken the previous reports. He looked concerned, but said there was not much he could do without evidence of who sent it. I asked him to increase patrols in the area, and he promised to have deputies drive by a few times each night. The easement closing went smoothly despite the harassment. Deborah was not there, which was probably for the best. Gerald and Patrick signed on behalf of the HOA, and the $15,000 check was deposited into my account. James had done excellent work on the easement agreement, and I felt confident my property rights were protected going forward. That Saturday, the HOA held its quarterly general meeting. I attended, curious to see how the board would handle the required apology. About 30 residents were present in the community center. Deborah sat at the head table, her expression sour. Gerald called the meeting to order and went through the usual business. When they got to new business, he cleared his throat. As many of you know, there was a dispute between the board and Ryan Atkins regarding snowmobile usage. The board acted hastily in attempting to ban snowmobiles without proper authority under our governing documents. We have since corrected this error and formalized an access easement for the boat launch road. On behalf of the board, I want to apologize to Mr. Atkins for any inconvenience this matter caused. It was not exactly a heartfelt mea culpa, but it satisfied the terms of our agreement. Several residents actually clapped, which surprised me. After the meeting, a few people came up to introduce themselves and welcome me to the community. One man, a retiree named Bob who lived near the boat launch, shook my hand vigorously. "Good for you for standing up to Deborah," he said. "She has been running this place like a dictator for too long. Maybe this will humble her a bit." I appreciated the support, but was still wary. The vandalism incidents had put me on edge. I kept the security cameras running and made sure to always lock my garage and vehicles. 2 weeks later, the situation escalated in a way I never anticipated. I woke up on a Sunday morning to find my snowmobile missing from my garage. The garage door had been pried open, and the machine was gone. I immediately called the sheriff's office and pulled up the security camera footage. The video showed 3 people, all wearing ski masks and dark clothing, breaking into my garage around 3 a.m. They had loaded the snowmobile onto a trailer and driven away. The license plate on the truck was obscured with mud, but I could make out that it was a dark-colored Ford F-150. The sheriff's deputy who responded took the video footage and filed a report for grand theft. The snowmobile was worth nearly $15,000, making it a felony. He promised to investigate, but warned me that these types of thefts were difficult to solve without witnesses or clear identification of the suspects. I was furious. This had gone way beyond petty vandalism. Someone had committed a serious crime, and I was certain it was connected to the HOA dispute. I called James and asked what my options were. File the police report, which you have done. File a claim with your insurance, and document everything. If you can prove the HOA or any of its members were involved, you could have a civil case for damages. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with solving the theft. I reviewed the security footage dozens of times, trying to find any identifying details. I drove around Pineview Estates looking for dark Ford F-150s. I even considered hiring a private investigator. Then I got a break. One of my neighbors, an older woman named Margaret who lived about half a mile away, called me on Thursday evening. "Ryan, I heard about your snowmobile being stolen. I might have some information." "What kind of information?" Sunday morning, very early, I was up because I could not sleep. I saw a dark truck go by with a trailer. I did not think much of it at the time, but now I wonder if it was related. "Did you see who was driving?" "Not really. But I saw where they turned. They went down Lakeshore Drive toward the Patterson property." "Deborah Patterson?" "Yes. Now, I am not saying it was Deborah, but that is where the truck went." I thanked Margaret profusely and immediately called the sheriff's office. I asked to speak with the detective who had been assigned to my case, a man named Detective Paul Richardson. I explained what Margaret had told me. "Did your neighbor get a license plate number?" Richardson asked. "No, but she is willing to make a statement about what she saw." "Okay. I will go talk to her. But Mr. Atkins, I have to warn you, this is still pretty thin evidence. Just because a truck went towards someone's property does not mean they were involved in the theft." "I understand. But given the history between me and Deborah Patterson, I think it is worth investigating." Richardson agreed to follow up. 2 days later, he called me with an update. "I spoke with your neighbor, and she gave a statement. I also drove out to the Patterson property. There is a dark blue Ford F-150 in the driveway, and I could see what looks like a snowmobile under a tarp in their pole barn." My heart rate spiked. "So what happens now?" "I need to get a warrant to search the property. I am working on that now. The problem is, owning a Ford F-150 and having a snowmobile is not proof of anything. I need to establish probable cause that the snowmobile in their barn is yours. The serial number is in the police report. Can you not just check it?" "I need a warrant to go on their property and check it." "That is what I am working on. Sit tight. I will call you as soon as I know more." The waiting was excruciating. It took 3 days for Richardson to get the warrant approved. When he finally executed the search warrant, I went with him at his invitation to identify my property. We pulled up to Deborah's house, a large colonial with a detached pole barn. Richardson had 2 other deputies with him. Deborah came out of the house, her face red with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "Mrs. Patterson, we have a warrant to search your property in connection with the theft of a snowmobile." Richardson handed her the paperwork. "This is ridiculous. I do not have anyone's snowmobile. Then you should not have any problem with us looking around." We walked to the pole barn. Inside, under a blue tarp, was my ski-doo. I identified it immediately by several distinctive features, including a custom decal I had added and a small dent in the left side panel. Richardson checked the serial number against the police report and confirmed it was my machine. "Mrs. Patterson, you are under arrest for receiving stolen property," Richardson said, pulling out his handcuffs. Deborah's face went white. "I did not steal anything. Someone asked me to store it for them." "Who asked you to store it? I want a lawyer." Richardson read Deborah her rights and put her in the back of his patrol car. He then searched the rest of the pole barn and found additional evidence, including tools that had been stolen from another resident's garage the previous month. It turned out Deborah had been involved in multiple thefts. The case against Deborah developed quickly. Under questioning, she admitted that she had recruited her nephew and his friend to steal my snowmobile as retaliation for the easement dispute. She had planned to strip it for parts and sell them online. The prosecution charged her with conspiracy to commit grand theft, receiving stolen property, and several related offenses. The fallout in Pineview Estates was immediate and dramatic. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and Deborah was removed from the board unanimously. Gerald was appointed interim president, and he immediately reached out to apologize on behalf of the entire community. "Ryan, I am so sorry. None of us had any idea Deborah was capable of something like this. She always had a temper, but I never thought she would cross the line into criminal behavior." "I appreciate that, Gerald. I am just glad we caught her before she disposed of my property." The criminal case moved through the system over the next several months. Deborah eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for avoiding jail time. She was sentenced to 3 years probation, ordered to pay restitution for my legal fees and the damages to my property, and required to complete 200 hours of community service. Her nephew and his friend, both in their early 20s, received similar sentences. As part of the plea agreement, Deborah was also required to resign from the HOA permanently and agree to never hold a position of authority in any homeowner association again. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Martinez, made it clear that she took property crimes seriously. "Mrs. Patterson, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust to commit crimes against a neighbor over a petty dispute," Judge Martinez said during the sentencing hearing. "This behavior is unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Consider yourself fortunate that the victim is not pushing for harsher penalties." I attended the sentencing hearing, but did not make a statement. I had gotten my snowmobile back. The HOA had compensated me for the damages and legal fees, and Deborah was out of my life permanently. That was enough for me. In the aftermath of the criminal case, the HOA underwent significant changes. A new board was elected, with Gerald continuing as president. They updated the governing documents to clarify the rules and prevent future abuses of authority. They also established a dispute resolution process that required mediation before any fines could be imposed. The new board reached out to me and asked if I would be willing to serve on a welcoming committee for new residents. They wanted to make sure future homeowners felt welcomed rather than harassed. I declined the formal committee role but agreed to help informally when needed. My relationship with the other residents improved dramatically. It turned out that most people had been unhappy with Deborah's leadership for years, but felt powerless to do anything about it. By standing up to her, I had inadvertently sparked a reform movement that made the community better for everyone. Bob, the retiree who had congratulated me after the apology meeting, became a good friend. We went snowmobiling together several times that winter, and he introduced me to the local snowmobile club. Through the club, I met dozens of other enthusiasts and became part of a welcoming community of people who shared my passion for the sport. Helen, the woman from the Lake Association who had tried to mediate the dispute, also became a friend. She invited me to join the Lake Association board, and I accepted. It was a way to give back to the community and ensure that future disputes were handled constructively rather than destructively. The following summer, I hosted a neighborhood barbecue at my house. About 20 families attended, including Gerald and his wife. We grilled burgers, the kids played in the yard, and people genuinely seemed to enjoy themselves. It was a far cry from the hostile environment I had experienced during my first months in Pineview Estates. As I stood on my deck, watching the sun set over the lake and listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation, I reflected on everything that had happened. The dispute with the HOA had been stressful and expensive, but it had also taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself and not backing down when I was in the right. The easement agreement I had negotiated was now recorded with the county and would protect my property rights in perpetuity. The $15,000 had more than covered my legal fees and the cost of the security system I had installed. And most importantly, I had earned the respect of my neighbors by refusing to be bullied. My snowmobile sat in the garage, ready for the next winter season. I had added an additional lock and an alarm system after the theft, but I refused to live in fear. This was my home, my property, and my life. I had fought for it and won. That fall, I received a handwritten letter from Deborah. It was a genuine apology, not something court-ordered or drafted by a lawyer. She acknowledged that she had let her ego and anger get the better of her, and that she had made terrible decisions that hurt innocent people. She did not ask for forgiveness or make excuses. She simply said she was sorry and hoped I could move on with my life. I appreciated the letter, though I did not respond. Some wounds do not require continued dialogue to heal. The fact that she had taken the time to write it was enough for me. The next winter was everything I had hoped for when I bought the property. The snowfall was abundant, the trails were in excellent condition, and I spent countless hours exploring the forests around Eagle River. I joined a snowmobile touring group and took several weekend trips to different parts of northern Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. My house became known as a gathering spot for snowmobile enthusiasts. Bob and I would often host groups of riders who would park their trailers in my driveway, head out on the trails for the day, and return in the evening for hot chocolate and conversation around a fire pit in my yard. The HOA, under Gerald's leadership, embraced this rather than fought it. They recognized that snowmobiling was part of the culture in Eagle River, and that trying to ban it had been foolish from the start. Several other residents bought snowmobiles over the next few years, and we formed an informal Pineview Estates riding club. 3 years after the initial dispute, I was at the hardware store in town when I ran into Deborah. It was the first time I had seen her since the sentencing hearing. She looked older, more tired, but there was a calmness about her that had not been there before. "Ryan," she said quietly, I was not sure if you would want to talk to me. Hello, Deborah, how have you been? Better. I have been seeing a therapist to work through my anger issues. And I have been volunteering at the food bank as part of my community service. It has been humbling but good for me. I am glad to hear that. I want you to know, I really am sorry for what I did. It was wrong on every level. You did not deserve any of that. I appreciate you saying that. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do afterward. She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. Thank you for not destroying my life completely. You could have pushed for jail time and I would not have blamed you. That would not have helped anyone. I am glad you are working on yourself. That is the best thing you can do. We parted ways, and I drove home thinking about the complexity of human nature. Deborah had been a bully and a criminal, but she was also a person struggling with her own demons. I did not excuse her behavior, but I could understand that people are more than their worst moments. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a new family moving into the house next to mine. A couple in their 30s were unloading boxes from a moving truck while two young kids ran around the yard. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to Pineview Estates," I said, shaking the man's hand. "I am Ryan Atkins. I live next door." "Nice to meet you," he said with a warm smile. "I am David Chen, and this is my wife Emily. Those two tornadoes are our kids, Sophie and Marcus. If you need anything, let me know. This is a great community. It took a little while to get there, but the neighbors are good people." "We have heard great things about the area," Emily said. "We are really excited about the snowmobiling. That was one of the main reasons we moved here." I laughed. "You are going to fit in just fine. We have a whole group of riders here. I will introduce you around." That evening I sat on my deck with a beer, watching the sun set over the lake. The access road, the one that crossed my property and had been the source of so much conflict, stretched out before me. Cars passed by occasionally, residents heading to the boat launch or coming home from a day on the water. The easement agreement I had fought so hard for was working exactly as intended. I thought about that first email from Deborah, threatening me with fines for owning a snowmobile. It seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 3 years. That single email had sparked a chain of events that transformed my life and the entire community. If Deborah had just left me alone, none of it would have happened. I would have quietly enjoyed my snowmobile, paid my HOA dues, and lived a peaceful existence. But she had pushed, and I had pushed back harder. In the end, I had won not just the battle but the entire war. The snowmobile in my garage represented more than just a recreational vehicle. It represented my refusal to be intimidated, my willingness to stand up for my rights, and my determination to live my life on my own terms. It was a symbol of freedom and independence, and I would never take it for granted. As darkness fell and the stars came out, I raised my beer in a silent toast. To property rights, to standing your ground, and to the sweetness of victory when you are in the right. Pineview Estates was my home, and I had earned my place here the hard way. The story of the HOA that tried to ban my snowmobile had become something of a legend in the area. People I met at the snowmobile club or the hardware store would say, "Oh, you are the guy who shut down the access road." And I would have to explain that I had not actually shut it down, just leveraged it to protect my rights. The truth was more nuanced than the legend, but that was okay. The important thing was that I had learned valuable lessons about community, conflict, and standing up for yourself. I had also learned that most people are reasonable if you give them a chance, and that bullies only have power if you let them. Looking back, I would not change anything about how I handled the situation. I had been firm but fair, demanding but reasonable. I had used the leverage I had discovered not to punish innocent people, but to protect my own rights against an overreaching HOA board. The $15,000 easement payment had been well worth it from both perspectives. The HOA got permanent, legal access to their boat launch. I got compensation for giving up property rights and a formal acknowledgement that I had been wronged. It was the definition of a fair compromise. More importantly, the experience had strengthened my connection to the community. By forcing a reckoning with Deborah's leadership style, I had helped create a better environment for everyone. The new HOA board was transparent, fair, and focused on serving the residents rather than controlling them. My first winter in Eagle River had been marred by conflict, but every winter since had been filled with joy. The trails called to me every time fresh snow fell, and I answered that call with enthusiasm. The friends I had made through snowmobiling enriched my life in ways I had never anticipated. As I finally went inside for the night, I took one last look at the access road. Tomorrow, cars would drive across my property to reach the boat launch, just as they had for 40 years. But now there was a legal agreement in place, properly recorded and compensated. Everything was as it should be. I had come to Eagle River looking for a quiet place to enjoy winter sports and a peaceful community to call home. I had found both, though not without a fight. The HOA had tried to ban my snowmobile, and I had responded by revealing their vulnerability. In the end, we had both gotten what we needed, and the community was stronger for it. The snowmobile sat waiting in my garage, ready for the next adventure. The access road crossed my land with legal authority and fair compensation. And I lived in peace, surrounded by good neighbors and endless trails. It was everything I had wanted, earned through determination and a willingness to stand my ground. Some people might say I had been too aggressive or too litigious, but I knew the truth. I had simply refused to be pushed around, and I had used the tools available to me to protect my property rights. In America, in Wisconsin, in Eagle River, that was not just my right but my responsibility. The story of Ryan Atkins versus the Pineview Estates HOA had reached its conclusion. Justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and life had moved on. The access road remained open, the snowmobiles continued to ride, and the community thrived under new leadership. And if anyone ever asked me for advice on dealing with an overreaching HOA, I had a simple answer. Know your rights, document everything, and never be afraid to use whatever leverage you have. Property rights matter, and sometimes you have to fight to protect them. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I smiled thinking about the weekend ahead. Bob and I were planning a trip to the trails near Iron Mountain, Michigan, a 6-hour ride through some of the most beautiful country in the Midwest. The weather forecast called for clear skies and fresh powder. My snowmobile was tuned up and ready. My gear was packed, and my property rights were secure, protected by a legally binding easement agreement that had been hard-won but worth every penny. Life in Pineview Estates was good. The HOA had learned its lesson. Deborah had paid for her crimes. And I had my freedom to enjoy my property as I saw fit, within reasonable limits, and in compliance with the actual rules that governed our community. It was everything I had fought for, and I was grateful for every moment of it. The access road stretched across my land, a constant reminder of the power of standing your ground and the importance of knowing your rights. And every time I fired up my snowmobile and headed out to the trails, I remembered why the fight had been worth it. This was my home. This was my life. And no one, not an overreaching HOA president or anyone else, was going to take it away from me. I had won this battle fairly and squarely, using the law and my legitimate property rights. That victory would stand for as long as I owned this land. The end of the conflict had brought a new beginning for the entire community. Pineview Estates was a better place because someone had finally stood up to Deborah's tyranny. The residents had rallied around principles of fairness and reasonable governance. And a new era of cooperation and mutual respect had begun. As winter turned to spring and spring to summer, life continued in its pleasant rhythm. I maintained my property, participated in community events, and built genuine friendships with my neighbors. The snowmobile sat quietly in the garage during the warm months, but I knew it would be ready when the snow returned. And when that first snowfall came, blanketing Pineview Estates in white, I would fire up that machine with pride and satisfaction. Not just because I loved snowmobiling, but because that snowmobile represented something bigger. It represented the principle that your home is your castle and your property rights are sacred. The HOA had tried to take that away from me. They had failed. And in failing, they had learned a valuable lesson about the limits of their authority and the importance of treating all homeowners with respect. The access road would continue to serve the community, legally and properly. My snowmobile would continue to carry me through the winter wonderland of northern Wisconsin. And I would continue to live my life on my terms, in my home, on my land. That was the ultimate victory, and it was one I would never take for granted. The fight had been hard, but the outcome had been just. And every day I spent in Pineview Estates was a reminder that standing up for yourself is not just right, it is necessary. The community had grown and changed because one person refused to back down. That person was me, and I was proud of what I had accomplished. Not through aggression or vindictiveness, but through knowledge, determination, and a clear-eyed understanding of property rights and HOA law. This was the American dream, owning land, defending it, and building a life surrounded by community and natural beauty. I had achieved that dream, and no one could take it away. The snowmobile was just a symbol, but what it represented was everything: freedom, independence, the right to live as you choose on your own property. These were the values I had fought for, and these were the values I had won. The story of my conflict with the HOA would fade into memory, but the principles would remain forever. And so my life in Eagle River continued, rich with friendship, adventure, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had stood my ground when it mattered most. The access road crossed my land with my permission, properly documented and fairly compensated. My snowmobile sat in my garage, ready for the next ride. And I lived in peace, having earned my place in this community through courage and conviction. That was how the story ended, not with conflict but with resolution. Not with anger but with understanding. And not with division but with a stronger, better community that had learned from its mistakes and moved forward together. The HOA had tried to ban my snowmobile. I had revealed their access road crossed my land and revoked permission until they made things right. They had made things right, and now we all lived better for it. That was justice, pure and simple,